I never knew a word could haunt you the way unmarriageable haunted me. It wasn't shouted or screamed. My mother said it casually in the middle of a family lunch while refilling my cousin's glass with juice. As if the word meant nothing. As if it hadn't cracked something inside my chest that never quite healed. She's kind. Yes, but not every girl is meant to be married, my mother had said. Some are just built different. Like our Myra. Always too opinionated, too plain. I remember chewing slowly, pretending not to hear it. My hands trembled under the table, fists clenched around the napkin in my lap like it was the only thing holding me together. I glanced at my father, hoping he'd correct her, or at least soften the blow. But he just nodded, eyes fixed on his plate, like he agreed with her, like he always did. That was 2 years ago, and yet every time I stood in front of a mirror or tried on a new dress or laughed too loudly, that word echoed in the back of my mind. Marriageable. As if I were a piece of expired bread on a supermarket. Shelf passed over again and again for fresher loaves. Growing up, I wasn't the daughter my parents dreamed of. My sister Anaya was the golden child, soft-spoken, graceful, with a face that could launch 1,000 arranged marriages. I was the one who preferred books to beauty salons, logic over lipstick. While Anaya practiced walking in heels for the school pageant, I was holed up in my room building science fair projects. My parents always said they were proud of me, but it was the kind of pride you reserve for a stray cat you managed to keep alive. Not the kind that fills you with warmth. By the time I turned 27, every family gathering became a silent interrogation. Aunties whispered about my age. Uncles asked if I was too career-focused. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say that I had been in love before, that I'd been hurt so deeply once that it took years to smile without flinching. But I never said anything, 'cause in our family, silence was safer than truth. I had built a quiet life for myself, a good job as a health program coordinator, a cozy apartment filled with plants and books, friends who laughed loudly and loved fiercely. But to my parents, none of that mattered. You'll die alone. My mother once hissed during an argument. A woman without a husband is like a house without a roof. And I remember replying, better a roofless house than a broken one. Filled with storms. She slapped me that day. Not hard, but with enough force to remind me that my place in this family was conditional learned, never given. I tried dating. I tried being softer, quieter, more agreeable. I let distant relatives set me up with men who looked at me like I was a job interview they couldn't wait to finish. I laughed at bad jokes, nodded when they said they preferred traditional wives. I hated every second of it. And every time I came home single, my mother would sigh a little louder. My father would look a little more disappointed. I began to believe them. I began to believe that I was too much or not enough. That I was smart, yes, but not beautiful. Capable, yes, but not lovable. I carried their disapproval like a stone in my chest. Heavy and cold dot until I met Luke. But I'll tell you about him later, right now. I want you to understand what it feels like to be the daughter who isn't chosen. The one who gets passed over, overlooked, dismissed. The one who watches her sister try on bridal gowns while being told she should focus on finding stability, not love. The one whose worth is measured by her marital status, not her character. I remember one particular afternoon Anaya had just gotten engaged to Roisle, a doctor with a flashy smile and a father in politics. Our house buzzed with excitement, the air thick with the scent of roses and expensive catering orders. I tried to help set the table, tried to smile, tried to ignore the way my mother whispered behind me. I just hope Mira doesn't embarrass us at the engagement party. She told one of her friends. She still doesn't know how to wear makeup properly. I wanted to disappear, so I did. I went to my room, closed the door, and curled up in bed like I used to when I was little and afraid of thunderstorms. Except this time, the thunder wasn't. Outside, it was inside McWyatt, trembling, waiting. They didn't see me. Not really. They saw a failure draped in politeness. A placeholder. A misfit. But even misfits have hearts. Even I had dreams. And as much as I wanted to bury them, something inside me refused to die. A spark, a whisper, a belief that maybe, just maybe, I was not what they said I was. Not unmarriageable, just unappreciated. And one day, that truth would rise louder than their lies. I was never one for grand gestures. That was Anaya's department surprise. Proposals at candlelit rooftops, spa days before bridal fittings, and gold-embossed invitations. My life was a quiet string of small victories, getting the last seat on the bus, finishing reports before deadlines, eating dinner without breaking down. But the day he arrived, the sky broke its silence. It had been a particularly harsh morning. The sun was high, unforgiving, and the tension in our home even more unbearable than usual. The wedding was a week away in Ias, of course, and everything revolved around it. From the moment the kettle boiled to the second the lights were switched off, it was all wedding talk. Mira, can you pick up the tailor order? Mira, iron the table linens. Mira, do something useful for once. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. I settled for a nod and slipped out quietly, only to return home later with blisters on my feet and a knot in my throat. I stood outside the gate for a long time, staring at our old house. My mother's plants lined the balcony like obedient soldiers. The porch fan spun lazily, unaware of the war inside. My war. A war no one acknowledged. When I walked in, the house was humming with relatives. Laughter floated through the living room. Sugar and spite rolled into one. I tried to slip past the chaos unnoticed, but of course fate had other plans. Ah, there she is, my aunt sniffed. The elder daughter, still unmarried, still unbothered. They laughed. My mother did too, though she pretended it was at something else. I didn't say a word, never did, but that's when it happened. The low, steady, were in the distance. At first, I thought it was thunder, then a plane, and I realized it was getting louder, closer. People looked up. Curtains were drawn back. Someone said, "Is that ... a helicopter?" I walked out onto the porch. Yes, it was a helicopter. Real, massive, roaring through the sky and beginning to descend right in the middle of the field, across from our house. The whole neighborhood was out now. Phones raised, mouths open. Someone said it must be a politician or a businessman, maybe a film star. I didn't care until the door opened and he stepped out. My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, time slowed down. Everything, the chatter, the gasps, even the breeze, froze. Luke in a sharp suit. One hand shielding his eyes from the sun, the other clutching a bouquet of white tulips. My favorite? I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Not since the day I broke things off. Convinced that I'd only ruin his life the way I had ruined my own. He looked around, spotted me, and smiled. Not the kind of smile you flash for cameras. The kind of smile that says, "I see you. I always have." And then he walked toward me. The earth might as well have cracked open under our street, but I wouldn't have noticed. I heard someone whisper, "Is that a celebrity?" No, someone said he owns multiple companies in Europe. He's Griaf. He's coming here. He's walking to her. He stopped in front of me, his eyes searching mine for hesitation. "Hi," he said softly, like we hadn't been apart for 12 months and 2 heartbreaks. I could barely breathe. "Hi." He handed me the tulips. I tried to be patient. "Mira, I tried to give you space." But I realized space doesn't mean silence. My fingers trembled as I held the flowers. "Why now?" He glanced over his shoulder at the crowd watching us like a movie, then back at me. "Because I got tired of you believing you were unworthy. It's tired of your parents making you feel like you had to shrink to fit in." The wind tousled his hair. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. "Mira," he continued, "you told me once that you didn't believe in grand gestures. That love wasn't loud, it was loyal. So I stayed silent, until now. Because maybe it's time you had someone scream." their love for you loud enough to drown out their cruelty. Behind us, the porch was silent. For once, no one had anything to say. Luke's hand found mine. "I'm not asking for forever today," he said gently. "I'm just asking you to come with me. To some place where your worth isn't tied to your ring finger. Where no one uses unmarriageable like a curse." Tears blurred my vision. And all my years, no one had ever asked me to leave for something better. Only to leave as punishment, disgrace, failure. But this was a hand outstretched in love, in choice, in possibility. I nodded. And just like that, I stepped off the porch, past the tulips in my mother's balcony, past the relatives frozen in judgment, walked toward the helicopter, hand in hand with the only man who ever saw me as whole. Not perfect, not pretty, but enough. The moment I stepped into the helicopter, it felt like I had crossed some invisible line, like the version of me they had always mocked was left standing on the porch. Luke helped me inside, his touch warm, steady. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I might crumble under the weight of all the years I'd spent trying to be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't. The cabin was surprisingly quiet once the door shut. The noise of the rotors dulled into a distant hum. It was just the two of us, and my heart still beating like it hadn't learned to trust this moment. Luke handed me a headset so you can hear me. I put it on. He smiled as the pilot began to lift us up, slowly at first, then soaring above the neighborhood above. The place that had always made me feel so small. "Are you okay?" he asked. I wanted to answer, but I didn't know what I was. Okay wasn't the word. I was stunned, nervous, free-floating, like I was watching someone else live the kind of life that happened in books and dramas. Not to people like me, talk to me. Luke said gently, his eyes never leaving mine. I exhaled, shaky. "You shouldn't have come." He tilted his head. "That's the first thing you want to say to me. After I landed a helicopter in the middle of your street," I cracked a smile. It was faint, but it was there. "I just mean, this is too much. You always go too far for me." "I don't think I go far enough," he said. That silenced me again. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Do you know what it felt like watching you disappear from my life without a real goodbye? I wanted to come after you every day, but I thought I was giving you what you needed: space, respect. You were," I whispered. "You were perfect. I just wasn't ready to be loved like that." Luke softened, and now I glanced out the window. The world below looked so distant, so powerless. It's the same streets where I used to walk with. My head down now looked like lines on a map I no longer had to follow. Now I think I've been surviving for so long. I forgot what choosing myself felt like. He reached across and took my hand again. "You don't have to survive anymore, Mira. You get to live." I blinked fast to hold back the tears. He sat back with a soft sigh. "You know, when I told my assistant I needed to take the helicopter, she thought I was crazy. She wasn't wrong." He laughed. "She said, 'Are you going to propose?' And I told her, 'No, I'm just going to remind someone she matters.'" My heart broke a little more in the best way. No pressure. No ring, no dramatic announcement, just love. "I don't know where to go from here," I confessed. "I mean, what now?" Luke nodded like he'd expected that. "We go somewhere peaceful. I booked a small resort just a few hours from here. You'll have your own space, time to think. No pressure, no expectations, just rest." I stared at him, stunned. "You really planned all this?" He smiled shyly. "Only for the last 6 months." I covered my mouth, trying not to cry. All these years, I thought no one noticed when I was fading. That I was invisible, just the background to other people's stories. But here he was, remembering things I hadn't even told him out loud. "Mira," he said, serious now, "I'm not doing this to fix you. You were never broken. I just want to be someone who sees you even when you don't." I finally let the tears fall. For the girl who had to grow up explaining why no one picked her. For the woman who was always second place, second choice. For the child whose own parents thought love was something you had to earn. I wept because someone had dared to look at Mims and all and say, "You're already enough." We flew in silence for a while after that. But it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next insult, the next disappointment, the next emotional punch I'd have to hide behind a fake smile. I was just breathing, existing, loved. I don't remember falling asleep in the helicopter, but I woke up to the sound of gentle waves and the rustle of palm trees. The sun filtered in through large glass windows, casting golden streaks across the room. I was lying in the softest bed I'd ever touched, wrapped in white linen, surrounded by stillness. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then everything came, rushing back the humiliation at home, the way they'd all looked at me like I was worthless. And the way Luke looked at me like I was the only one who mattered. He didn't try to talk me into staying with him. He didn't force a fairy tale ending on me. Instead, he gave me the one thing no one else ever had: time. A folded note rested on the nightstand beside a tray of fresh fruit and tea. Luke's handwriting. Myra, sleep, breathe, eat. I'll be around, but only when you're ready. You've carried enough weight. Let someone else hold space for you now. Luke. I clutched the paper to my chest. Tears threatened again. It wasn't the money or the helicopter or the 5-star room that undid MIT. Was this kindness? His quiet knowing of the exact things I needed. The absence of pressure. That morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked barefoot onto the balcony, curled up in a chair, and just sat, letting the sea wind brush through my hair like it was allowed to touch something sacred. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to shrink. No one was watching. No one was criticizing. I was allowed to exist, unfiltered, but with that silence came something else, the mirror inside me. For so long, I had looked into mirrors and seen failure, unmarriageable, average, disappointment. Every time I heard those words from my parents, they carved into me like scripture I couldn't unlearn. And maybe I had believed them. Maybe I had allowed their voices to live inside me even after they walked out of the room. But now I was beginning to wonder, what if I'd never been the problem? What if they just didn't know how to love someone like me? Someone who dreamed bigger than their small town. Someone who wanted more than survival. Someone who wouldn't play small to make others feel comfortable. By mid-afternoon, I walked to the villa's private garden where Luke had said he'd be. Sure enough, I found him sitting on a bench under a giant mango tree, sketching something in a notebook. He looked up and smiled like he'd been expecting me all along. Hungry? Starved, I admitted, sitting next to him. But for more than just food. He closed the notebook and handed me a bottle of water. Talk to me. I looked at him, and this time I didn't feel shy or broken. I've spent most of my life apologizing for existing, I said. Like my birth was an inconvenience to everyone. My parents wanted a son first. Then they wanted a perfect daughter. Then a bride with high status. I was none of those things. Luke nodded quietly, listening. I used to think if I just worked harder, earned more, lost weight, dressed right, they'd, I don't know, finally say, "We're proud of you." But that day never came. He reached for my hand. They don't get to define you anymore. I swallowed hard. I know, but it's hard. I still hear their voices in my head, mocking me, telling me no one will ever truly want me. You know, he said slowly, my mom once told me something I didn't understand until now. She said some people don't know how to love without control. And when they see someone free, they try to clip their wings because freedom makes them feel small. I exhaled. That hit deep. Maybe they never hated you, Mira. Maybe they just hated how you reminded them of everything they weren't brave enough to be. Silence fell again, but it wasn't empty. I want to forgive them, I whispered. Then do it, he said. I'm not ready. then don't. Forgiveness isn't something you rush. It's something that comes naturally when you've healed enough to let go, not for them, but for you. That evening, we took a walk along the beach. Sky was burning with orange and violet hues, and I let the waves touch my toes like they were baptizing me into a new version of myself. I'm scared, I admitted. Of what? Of falling for you again. Luke paused. Then let me fall first. I'll catch you when you're ready. I laughed through tears. You always say things like that? Things that sound like they belong in poetry. He chuckled. Maybe. Because loving you feels like poetry. I stopped walking, turned to face him. You still love me? I never stopped. I stared at him. This man who could have had anyone chose me. Not out of pity, not out of convenience, but because he saw me. The girl behind the silence, the woman beneath the wounds, the fire under the ashes. I think. I'm ready to look in the mirror again, I whispered. He reached up and brushed hair from my face. And what do you think you'll see? I smiled quietly. Someone worth choosing, even if no one else ever does again. I had barely slept that night, even with the waves whispering outside. My window and the softest bed wrapped around me like a hug. My heart beat with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, Kay, and fear. Hope that maybe I could rebuild myself. Brick by broken brick. Fear that the ghosts I thought I'd escaped would find me here. The next morning, found Luke sitting at the outdoor breakfast table, scrolling through something on his phone. His face looked serious, calm, but alert. What? Is it? I asked, sinking into the seat across from him. He looked up. You need to see this. He passed me his phone. My hands trembled before I even read the message. It was a forwarded text from my father. Myra, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I saw the video. I saw him land. And I saw you leave, head held high, while we stood there like fools. I've never felt smaller. I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry. For not standing up for you. For calling you names. For turning your own home into a place you feared coming back to. Your mother's upset too. But mostly because the neighbors are talking. I won't pretend she's changed, but I have. I'm proud of you. Not because of the helicopter, but because of the way you walked away. I hope someday you'll let me say it to your face. Until then, just be safe. Love, Dad. My fingers gripped the phone tightly, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. All my life I had craved these words. And now that they were here, I didn't know what to do with them. Are you okay? Luke asked gently. I don't know, I whispered. I thought hearing this would feel like healing. But it feels like bleeding. He reached across the table and held my hand. 'Cause it's both. Sometimes the wounds have to open before they close properly. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd built walls around myself to protect the small flame of self-worth I still had. And now one text message had cracked those walls wide open. That afternoon, I wandered into the villa's library, needing space from the world even. From Luke, I curled up in a window seat and stared at the sky for what felt like hours. I thought about my father, about the way he used to lift me on his shoulders when I was little, about how he stopped when I turned 10. Like girlhood made me too heavy for affection. About how he used to smile at my drawings until I said I wanted to be an artist. Then he laughed, told me to get real, and never looked at them again. And yet, he still remembered me. He still loved me, in his own broken way. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive him, but I was ready to stop hating myself for not being enough. I was enough. I had always been enough. That evening, Luke knocked softly on my door. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, just heavy. I know something that might help. He led me down a narrow path that twisted through palm trees and blooming hibiscus. At the end was a tiny dock with a small wooden boat waiting. You're kidnapping me again? I teased. He grinned. Just borrowing you for a little while. The boat rocked gently as we stepped in. We drifted into the open lagoon, the sky, melting into shades of gold and coral above us. He didn't talk much. He let the silence do its magic. It was the kind of silence that doesn't demand, doesn't accuse, the kind that wraps around you like a safe room, eventually. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "What's that?" He handed it to me. Inside was a delicate silver locket. I opened it. On one side there was a tiny mirror, on the other, an engraving. The girl who finally saw herself. Tears slid silently down my cheeks. "I wanted you to have something," he said, "that reminds you who you are. Every time they try to tell you otherwise, I clutched it to my heart. Thank you." He leaned closer. "I didn't fall in love with you because you were soft or sweet or pretty. I fell for you because you were real. Because even when you broke with fire in your soul." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time I didn't flinch from love. I let it in, not because I needed it, but because I'd finally realized I deserved it. "Luke," I whispered, "can I ask you something? Anything? Why me? Why come back? Why choose this girl, the one everyone said was a disappointment?" He smiled and brushed a strand of hair from my face. "Because you were never a disappointment. You were a miracle they didn't know how to receive. I just had better eyes." Didn't respond. I just leaned forward and kissed him slow, certain, and unapologetic. It wasn't the kind of kiss that fixes everything. It was the kind that says, "We're broken, but we're healing." It was the kind that says, "We're not perfect, but we're trying." It was the kind that says, "We're here, and that's enough." I never thought I'd step foot in that house again, but here I was standing at the rusted gate of my childhood home. The familiar creak of the hinges greeting me like an old wound. Luke stood beside me, silent but steady. He had offered to wait in the car, but I'd asked him to come with me, not as a shield, but as a witness. A witness to the girl who had once been broken and the woman who had put herself back together. The door opened before I could knock. My mother, still regal, still sharp. Her eyes ran over me from head to toe, instantly assessing my clothes, my posture, my presence. Then they landed on Luke, and for a moment her lips parted. Maybe in shock, maybe in judgment. And then, like she always did, she masked. "You came," she said stiffly. I nodded. "I did." She stepped aside. "Your father's in the study." The air inside smelled exactly as I remembered. Lemongrass cleaner, dust, a hint of disappointment. But this time, I didn't shrink. We walked down the narrow hall, and when we entered the study, my father stood up as though bracing for impact. He looked smaller somehow, not just in age, but in guilt. He cleared his throat. "Mira." I didn't speak. Not yet. I wanted to see if he meant it. "If this wasn't just another performance, I watched that video of you," he began. "Of him landing the helicopter. And the way you walked. Away after everything we said to you." He swallowed. "I realized I'd spent years trying to control you, shape you, break you. Because I was afraid you'd fail. Or worse, that you'd succeed without needing us." I blinked. "I won't ask you to forget what we did," he added. "But I'm asking if you can allow me to be someone better now." It was quiet, painfully quiet. And then I opened my mouth. "You called me unmarriageable." He nodded slowly. "I did. I was wrong. You laughed when I told you about my scholarship. You said it was a phase. I was wrong. Let Mom shame me in front of guests. Told me to keep my voice down, to wear what she said, to marry who she chose. I was wrong." His eyes shone tears, from the man who never cried. "I spent years thinking I was the problem," I whispered, "trying to twist myself into a version you'd be proud of. But I realize now I was never the issue. I was just different from what you expected." He took a step forward. "And different is beautiful. Mira, I see that now." The little girl inside me, so desperate for love, wanted to run into his arms. But the woman I am now, she stepped forward calmly, hugged him slowly. Not to seek validation, but to forgive. Not for him, For me. Because forgiveness is how we free ourselves from the prison of other people's choices. When I pulled away, his voice cracked. You've grown into someone I never imagined, but exactly what this world needs. For the first time, my mother spoke. She was still by the doorway. Your name's being mentioned in local magazines. The neighbors keep asking about the girl with the flying fiancé. She offered a tight smile. I gave her a knowing look. Still worried about the neighbors? She looked away, ashamed, but I didn't press further. Not everyone grows at the same pace. Some never do. But I was done waiting for her to see me. Luke took my hand gently. Ready? I nodded. We walked. Back out to the car. The wind felt warmer than I remembered. Alter. As though it too had been waiting for me to return on my terms. As we drove away. I glanced at the house in the rearview mirror. It didn't hold power over me anymore. It was just a building. And I was finally free. 3 months later, the art gallery buzzed with voices, laughter, camera shutters clicking. My very first solo exhibition, Unmarriageable, The Art of Becoming. Paintings lined the walls. Portraits of girls breaking free from cages. Of women dancing in storms. Of daughters flying above the cities that tried to bury them. At the center was the piece everyone seemed drawn to. A girl in a torn dress, standing on a rooftop, arms wide open, light beaming from within her chest. Luke came up beside me, arms slipping around my waist. You did this, he whispered. No, I smiled. We did. From the corner of my eye, I saw someone walking in. My father. No suit this time, just a simple shirt. He looked around the gallery, then stopped in front of the rooftop painting, and he smiled. Not the smile of pride, but of understanding. Sometimes you have to be called names to learn your own name. Sometimes you have to be thrown out to find the doors meant for you. My parents called me unmarriageable. But my worth was never tied to being chosen. It was tied to choosing myself and the man who landed in a helicopter. He didn't just come to rescue me. He came to stand beside the woman who had already saved herself.